Welcome to the Vets Talking Pets podcast. From scales to tails, real talk with real vets. No pet subject is off limits. With your hosts, Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. Hello and welcome to this edition of Vets Talking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts
and Dr. Vanessa Howie.
Have you ever heard people say that people do more research when they buy a fridge or some sort of kitchen appliance than acquiring a new pet? Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, I think I have heard it in the past. Certainly I know that research in terms of buying a pet is quite small. As often people decide to go and get a pet just on a whim, or they've spoken to a friend, or they've seen an animal that they think, I'd quite like that one. So I've certainly heard that, yeah. The level of research kind of varies between people, some that do lots and lots of research and others that don't. So that doesn't surprise me, I must admit.
And it does tend to be an emotional decision, doesn't it? That sort of knee-jerk often, or something like a cat turns up in their garden astray and they start looking after it. But it is a really big decision to take a pet into your home. And there's a lot to think about. So we thought we'd just talk about some of the things that are important before you get a pet to decide which species, which breed, what is going to suit your lifestyle best.
Yeah, that's right. And pets really do add so much to our lives, don't they? So there's the companionship, and particularly if you're someone living alone, then having that pet is so really, really important. Just to have another being, I think, in the house with you that you can talk to. It's really good to talk to your pets.
Well, it is, and I know particularly that in lockdown I was on my own and I had my cats, and yeah, they helped me to get through the really difficult situation. So I think they're really important for people who live on their own. But they're very good for children as well, really, aren't they? Sort of teaching them about empathy and things like that.
Yeah, they are, and certainly particularly if children are having a difficult time, they can be really helpful to have the pet that they can come home to, particularly, and actually offload all their worries and concerns to. And certainly that can really help. I think as a parent as well, having a pet can actually be the sensible one sometimes of the household. When you've got lots of stuff going on around you and the chaos, at least you've got some conditional love and something, an animal that you can offload to that actually won't answer you back. So I think particularly with teenagers in the house, that can sometimes be quite nice.
Yes, you can tell who's got teenagers. But it's so true, and animals really do seem to have some special bond, perhaps with adults or children who have particular problems, like sometimes with certain, I suppose, neurodiversities even. And I remember hearing of a case with a boy with mutism where the only person he spoke to was the cat, so they really do bring a lot to our lives. But obviously, we must be prepared to look after them properly. So if you're getting a pet, where do you think are the best places to go to get information?
Yeah, and I think we're always going to say this, we're vets, aren't we? I think so. It's inevitable that this is what we'll say, but actually going and talking to the vets at your local practice or a vet practice that you already have a relationship with, go and have a chat with them. Go and have a chat with the vet nurses that are there. Go and speak to them, the receptionists as well. They'll be the ones that will be able to give you some really good information, valuable information. But if you can get time with one of the vet nurses or the vets and actually, talk to them about what type of animal you're thinking of getting, and actually what are the pros and cons of getting that animal.
Definitely, vet nurses are really well placed for that. I think often practices don't use their nurses enough, but I'd certainly had clients in the past who had bought perhaps a breed of dog that they later found out was a bit of a problem, that were surprised when I said, well, you could have come and talked to me about it. So certainly that's a really good port of call. But also there are some really good websites, mainly of the sort of the national animal charities. There's a lot of information there on just sort of what pet you might choose. There's tools, aren't there? I think both PDSA and RSPCA, I think.
Yeah, so they have pet calculator tools which give you an idea of actually which animal you're thinking of getting and how much will it cost, therefore, to look after that animal. And actually, therefore, will you be able to cope with that species, that breed of animal? So yeah, it's a good starting point, certainly, to just give you a bit more information really about is the animal you're considering suitable.
And some of the breed-specific charities have some really good information. The Dogs Trust has lots of information about dog breeds. International Cat Care has a lot of information about cat breeds. And obviously there are breed organisations, things like the Royal Kennel Club, as it is now known, and the General Council of the Cat Fancy. That's a bit of a tongue twister, but that's the sort of cat equivalent of the Kennel Club. But Cats Protection, RSPCA, etc. have got lots of information as well. So it's really worth doing your research before you get your pet. And I suppose there's a really big question, which is big and therefore might have to take up a whole other podcast. Is getting a pet a right or a privilege?
Yeah, it is. It's a big question, Maggie. I think we'll put that aside until another podcast. But I think certainly we need to visit it. It's really important. Does everybody have a right to have a pet? I think we all probably have a right to enjoy the benefits that a pet can bring to our lives. So I think, yes, rather than getting down and dirty with that one today, shall we wait and leave that for another day?
I think we should, but certainly if anyone has any thoughts on that, we'd be really pleased to hear them, so that when we are discussing it, we get the views of people out there in podcast land. But anyway, if you've sort of thought, yes, I definitely want to get a pet, I suppose the general things people have to think about is, I suppose, first of all, is everyone in the house in agreement that that they want a pet? Because I think it's quite difficult if one person doesn't really want a pet. It's certainly something to consider, and particularly if perhaps somebody has an allergy or something like that.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think if it's the children begging for a pet, I think we have to be really cautious actually, because if mum, dad, or guardians of the children don't want to take on a pet, then actually it's the adults that need to be the ones that actually have this full responsibility, don't they? So, don't give in, I think, to the child that's begging. I think you've got to be the ones that are prepared to take on that responsibility.
Yeah, and actually, legally, you can't be responsible for a pet if you're under 16 years of age. The parent or guardian are legally responsible for its welfare. I think that's something a lot of people don't realise. So you as a parent or guardian have to have that responsibility. And without getting too technical, you have to be able to provide for all the welfare needs, and that's a legal requirement under the Animal Welfare Act, or Acts, because animal welfare is a devolved matter, so there's actually different legislation in the different parts of the UK, but they all really include being able to fulfil the five welfare needs.
Yeah, that's right. And thinking about the 5 welfare needs, if your animal becomes sick and you need to visit the vet with them, then actually it's going to be somebody who is an adult that has to sign that consent form. So the practice aren't going to allow a child under the age of 16 to sign the consent form anyway. So it's really important that you've got that adult oversight and can give the consent. The other thing, whilst we think about it though, is around where you're living as well, isn't it? So actually, if you're in rented accommodation, will your landlord be okay? Are they happy for you to have pets? So we certainly know that unfortunately that can be a bit of a sticking point, can't
Yeah, it really can. I mean, there are a lot of leases that say you can't have a pet, or that you have to get the landlord's permission. I think there's a bit more movement to try and encourage landlords to allow pets, and certainly I know a lot of the animal charities have been campaigning to try and make it that they can't automatically say no, but usually there are some restrictions even if they allow it, and in a way it's quite sensible. It's usually related to how much space people will have and insisting that pets are neutered and vaccinated, so that's actually quite a good thing. But I think it's a shame if everyone who rents can't have a pet. And often it does mean that they are tenants for longer if they are allowed a pet and they're more stable. So often they turn out to be really, really good tenants. But it is something you have to think about, because if you have that in your lease and then you break the terms, officially you could be evicted, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think importantly as well, and we fell into this bracket in our first house that we lived in, or our apartment, is that if you're actually a leaseholder, so we owned the apartment, but there was still a company that owned the freehold of it, so actually they had to give permission for you to have pets. So it makes it even more complicated. So we actually had to pay a fee to be able to keep our cats in the apartment. So, and it was a fee per animal. So I certainly know this is still going on in places. But yeah, that's just to be aware.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, got it agreed.
That's
so it's
quite complicated. So yes, certainly look into what restrictions there are, and certainly sometimes as well on certain estates they don't want free roaming pets. So it is worth just checking out before you get the pet, particularly if you're getting something like a cat or a dog.
Yeah, definitely.
So once we've said yes, we're going to get a pet, we have to think what species. And I suppose one of the big things, and this comes back to the whole, is it a right or a privilege, I suppose, is we do have to think about the cost of how much it is both to acquire the pet, but also how much it's going to cost, over time, in terms of all the different things that you need to think about. And all the obvious things like food and getting food bowls and leads and bedding, toys, all that sort of thing. But also I think sometimes people forget about thinking about the cost of vet care.
Yeah, definitely. But I think also just having to replenish items as well. I always find that it's like, oh gosh, we need to get a new harness. This one's worn out. And particularly going from, if you're acquiring a puppy or a kitten that grows, then actually, and you need to get bigger things, particularly with a puppy, then you might buy a harness to start with that only lasts you for 6 months, and then you're buying another harness. So actually the outgoings even at the beginning start to creep up, let alone with the vet care. But also you've got to think about what your young animal will need in terms of preventative health care as well in the early stages, don't you?
Definitely. And things like toys, you have to replace them, because often they get chewed or whatever, but also we want to keep them really interested and stimulated, and so having a range of toys is important. My cat loves the catnip toys, but he just destroys them, so I'm always having to buy more. But yes, there's all sorts of things, and even things like thinking about grooming or thinking about kennels or catteries. It all adds up. But obviously it's not just money, it's about, I suppose, how much time you have and space and things like that.
And space, yeah. So certainly time. Are you at home during the day? Are you fortunate to be enough to be home working? So you're there, or are you out working long hours out of the house? So do you need to, if you've got thinking getting a dog, do you therefore need to think about getting a dog walker as well, or someone that can come in and let your dog out? Who will look after your pet when you're not there? Are you someone that likes to go on holiday regularly? So actually that can be quite tricky. It can be quite costly getting a pet sitter in. So do you need to get a cat sitter in, for example? So I know both Maggie and I, we've both had cat sitters for many years, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. Yes, and I think it's been a big problem after lockdown that a lot of people acquired pets, particularly dogs, and they were at home all the time and it was fine. But then once they were back at work, if they were actually going back into the office or whatever, that there were problems with separation anxiety and other problems with the dogs, or the people just thinking, what are we going to do now, because we're not at home all day. And really with a dog you can't leave them for 8 hours. I mean, probably 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, I think sensibly 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, so you really have to think about that side of it, and if you are going away a lot, what you're going to do with the pet. You can't always expect neighbours to do it for free, or family members to, they may not always be around, particularly in the summer, so you really have to think about that.
Yeah, and I think that's it. That's what we found is difficult with summer holidays. You may have friends that can look after your pets during normal days, but when everyone else is on holiday through school holidays, it can make it quite tricky. So it'd be lovely if we all had a crystal ball and knew our circumstances and what they would be like forever as well.
Yeah.
But things do change, don't they? So if you're thinking of getting the pet, it's how will this pet work if your circumstances change as well, isn't it? I think this is what we should all try and just remember a little bit into the future.
And that's a really important point. And also that the needs of the pet may change.
Exactly
that generally, as they get older, they're more likely to have health problems, and therefore is there someone who actually not only could feed them when you're away but actually could give medication. And I think that's one of the reasons I have a proper cat sitter coming in, rather than just my neighbours would be happy to feed my cat, but I've had several cats that have been old and had lots of meds, and so that's been an important consideration. And also you have to think about who's in the household, what is a suitable pet if you've got young children, and also even with more elderly people, particularly things like getting a kitten or puppy that might get under their feet if they're a bit unstable. And we don't want to be sort of discriminatory, but sometimes a pet that's perhaps a little bit older and a bit more settled might be better. And what sort of household is it? Is it calm? Is it hectic and chaotic? And there are pets that suit either of those, I suppose, aren't there? But you do have to think.
I think this goes back to the not going out and just getting a pet on a whim, isn't it? Doing that research thoroughly. Who in your household have you got? And actually, how will the animal that you fancy getting at that time, how will they fit in? Will that work?
Yeah.
Certainly allergies. We've got allergy sufferers in my house.
Yes.
Fortunately, I'm a little bit unsympathetic, I think they would tell me. So we still have a menagerie in our house. But there are ways and means around it. But I think it's, doing your research thoroughly, because actually the pet could end up having a thoroughly awful time if they're having to be returned back to where they've come from, if the member of the family can't cope and their allergy is that severe. So.
Or even that they get shut in one room or something a lot of the time. And yes, I mean, it's probably for another podcast, but there are a few things now that can be done, like special diets. But it's something, particularly if people have quite severe allergies, it's something that's really important to think about. Have you got a garden? And obviously that depends on what species you're getting, but if you've got going to have a dog or a cat, or perhaps something like a rabbit or guinea pig that would really benefit from spending time outside, have you got a garden? Is it enclosed? How safe is it, etc.?
And how I would say also in that, and how easy if you've got space for a big hutch, because actually probably we should have talked about this earlier when we were talking about equipment, but actually it's surprising how, if you're going to have an outdoor bunny, how big a hutch you actually need for that rabbit. So do you have space, and can you get to the hutch without getting muddy feet and things in the winter? Does the rain come down into your hutch? These are all things that we've experienced. So actually, thinking about the location of where you can put hutch is really, really important. So and that in winter, can you put it somewhere where it's going to have a little bit of protection from the elements? Completely. Really. I think, do you have a suitable place for the bunny to go out in a run to eat some grass? And is that just going to turn into a quagmire of mud, even during the summer? So thinking about what you've got, really,
it's very important. And the other thing I think is worth thinking about is, what is the lifespan of the pet? And obviously, from a lot of points of view, you want a pet that's going to be with you for a long time. But also, without wanting to sound cynical, sometimes with some children's pets, for them not to have a really long lifespan can be advantageous if perhaps the children are going to, well, of course they're going to grow up, but they might end up, they're going to be leaving home at some point. So, but it is something to think about, because some pets have a very, very short lifespan, like something like a hamster or a gerbil. But if you have a tortoise, it may outlive you.
Yeah. That almost scares me, having a pet that outlives me, that lives for that long. That responsibility of having a pet. Obviously, some people would love that, but that responsibility, and then what happens if, the animal does outlive you? Yeah. Where's that tortoise going to go?
Yeah.
Who's going to care for that tortoise?
Yeah. So lots and lots of things to think about. So we've talked through loads of things, lots of food for thought when you're thinking about getting a pet. So next time we'll talk about what species of pet you should get. There's an awful lot to talk about that. So see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vet Stalking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@advovet.co.uk. And please join us again for our next episode. Your pets will thank you.